Hey Mike, what are some medicinal plants people should keep in mind?
Medicinal plants. Well, every plant's medicinal, but with current events as they are, I think first establishing the understanding that the difference between a food, a poison, and a medicine is dosage and frequency of use. You gotta have that baseline before you walk into the wall of green and do something that would damage yourself or the landscape. Okay, so the other piece to that is there's a responsibility for you to take care of yourself and to know what you're doing before you commit to putting something in or on your body. Any plant you approach is going to have a suite of phytochemicals in it to help it survive. And we've evolved right alongside these phytochemicals through the seasons in such a finely tuned way that our bodies require some of these phytochemicals, most of these phytochemicals, in order to flourish. Everything from aiding in digestion to absorbing nutrients to being able to increase the rhythmic flow of peristalsis to move food along to production of white blood cells. So when you talk about medicinal plants, there's thousands of plants and they all have some sort of property. Let's take the ones that are common heavy hitters that may or may not aid in your personal life. Again, the onus is on you for your own health, your own decisions, and ultimately the outcomes that are produced from you engaging in the plant kingdom. So I'm going to give you some names, some examples, but I don't want you to believe a word I say. I want you to do the research and find responsible and seasoned practitioners who can either vouch for through direct experience or find somebody who knows for you. Right off the bat, the first plants that come to mind that you should know are the members of the oak and those plants that are not in that family that contain tannins, tannic acid. So we have all of the oaks, both the black or red oak group and the white oaks. We also have the beeches, which are cousins to the oaks. In the needle-leaf trees, it's the hemlocks that contain the most tannins, in the Pinaceae specifically. But when we get into the shrubs, sweet fern is one of my favorite tannin-producing shrubs. So just knowing through the seasons what is available for the tannins, it's that important because it's the first line of defense against infection, whether it's bacterial or viral. Poor hygiene is number 3 on the list of why people die off-grid or in the woods or in nature, if you will. Number 1, of course, exposure-related, hypo or hyperthermia. Number 2, dehydration. But once you learn to address those, they become second nature habits for you. You're constantly monitoring for both and adjusting. Remaining comfortably cool and dry in the winter is a baseline behavior like breathing. Then after that, Giardia, food poisoning. Your body's burning need to expel fluids and everything that they contain faster than you can put fluids back in, causing a perfect scenario for hypovolemic shock where your heart doesn't have enough fluid to pump and so you kind of putter out. How do we avoid that? Hygiene. And if you want to make a wash, if you want to make a natural wash, you run out of your Germex, you're going to use tannic acid, whether it's the twigs or the acorns or the scraped bark or all of those leaves. The living part of that plant in the most vibrant stage it's in for that season is what you want to harvest for your medicinals. And you're going to make a strong enough tea that you can't see the bottom of your container, right? You know, you have these tannins in your kitchen if you drink tea. Those little self-contained pouches of tea leaves are excellent applicators for things like eye infections for your cat. If you get a cut in the woods or out of doors, immediately assume sepsis is going to occur. There's going to be an infection almost right away too, by the way. It's going to first retard the healing, so you won't see the cut close. Then it's going to start to swell and get red. And if that red spreads, and it will, towards your heart, because the infection is spreading, you're in a lot of trouble. It's not as easy as going to the hospital to get it taken care of if there's no hospital to get to, or you don't have a means to get there. So, tannic acid washes, tannic acid soaks if it's a puncture wound, agitating, also irrigating, as much as we can possibly to remove all of that foreign matter before we start committing to other important medicinals to close the wound and to knit it and to allow the body to do its thing under the protection of an antiseptic like the resin from balsam fir. So, on that line of being hostile to microorganisms, we're going to start to get a little bit more powerful. And as we survey the landscape, tannic acid is a great medium strength wash, but it's mostly antibacterial, not so much antiviral. One of the other camp pieces, aside from the plants, is always boil your water. Always boil your utensils, your dishes. Anything that starts to get manky, boil it and then sun dry it. Japanese knotweed and Japanese barberry have a suite of phytochemicals, both of them, that are showing a lot of promise and have been studied ad nauseum. There's a lot of numbers out there to show the efficacy of both with regard to antivirals as well as antibacterials. Now, I knew with this new virus floating around, even the experts are stumped. Every virus has the capability and the tendency to mutate, and it mutates much faster than we do. 30 generations of a virus is what, lunch break? So it has all of those permutations to express. Well, okay, the experts are stumped. What did the ancestors know? And right, Black Plague, all of these plagues before the advent of penicillin. But before the advent of penicillin, did you know rubbing bread covered in mold on pets and lesions and noticing that they weren't infecting was kind of the premise before penicillin? There were things that were going on that were actually effective. The people just didn't know why. Yeah, moldy bread. I'm putting that one out there for general knowledge only. The berberine and Berberis thurbungi, Japanese barberry, is what we're after. And if you're harvesting barberry in the woods, you're actually doing the park officials a favor. It's reviled as one of those highly invasive non-natives. Aliens, right? So the caretaker attitude shouldn't be lax. Always leave one or two to continue propagation, because you want to come back to that patch in 7 years to show the next generation of whatever, your community, your neighborhood, your family, your grandchildren, that patch, and allowing them to use it as an example of not only becoming a more independently owned and operated caregiver, but also applying that idea of caregiving to the landscape. And the next one is Japanese knotweed. We have protocols for Japanese knotweed because harvesting the root can be dangerous in that it'll spread everywhere. And once that establishes itself, there's videos from England of Japanese knotweed breaking through concrete pads. People attempted to pave over it. Tough stuff. The Japanese knotweed colony that we've managed for almost 20 years has been stunted in its progression across an open, sunny field, but it has sent runners completely under a 2-lane road and out into one of the neighbors' front yards. And he asks us every year to come harvest his place too. So you can build a symbiotic relationship with the plant, not only to keep it in check, but to do so without poisoning the soils or other plants around it, or people who might want to harvest those Japanese knotweed shoots for a rhubarb-like steamed vegetable. And there are states who are are doing just that. So you have to be mindful of where you live. What is the state's policy and procedures against the invasive species to make sure you're not ingesting poisons, because that's a real risk. If you do know of a place with Japanese knotweed, you should know that the runners go under the ground shallow and shoot straight out and away from the colony. It's a leading edge that spreads. That's only one of 3 ways that it propagates. But what we can do as herbalists is wait until mid-May, early June. You don't want to wait any longer than the shoots being mid-thigh, because then most of that energy in the root is being transferred up into those shoots. Usually around knee-high to 6 inches off the ground is the mark of the end of the root gathering season. And when you cut those roots open, there'll be this unique kind of cranberry orange color in the skin and in the meat of the root itself. The meat of the root will actually be a much lighter color of that, that spectrum. But that's the medicine, and you can smell it, and I encourage you to smell it. In fact, any plant that you already know, any plant that you work with all of the time, learn its texture when you crush it, how it smells. Really pour your senses into it, because the phytochemicals in those plants, I'm specifically talking about Japanese knotweed, but they're not just in those plants. For instance, the resveratrol in Japanese knotweed is many, many times greater in concentration than the resveratrol in red wine. But both have been shown effective against Lyme-like spirochetes, so that's good to know. Yeah, I would start with the plants that you know, and I would add, if you really want to be risque, learn about the invasive plants that are in your area. Purple loosestrife, by the way, another powerful medicinal plant that's worth knowing. The list of those invasives, every one of them is a heavy hitter in some way or another for medicine, right? And the thing I'd follow up on is, even if it's an invasive, even if it's a powerful medicine and you could use it or somebody you know could use it, we're not doctors, but even doctors call it practice. We're just trying to find our way to the most healthy expression of our lives as possible, and we're looking for as many alternate routes, should any one be denied, as possible, as a means of safety and security and peace of mind. That's the big one. Being at ease because you have these options. Even if they don't work. What is it called when the placebo effect? And heck, if you're going to blink out because you can't get to a hospital because the grid is down because whatever reason, well, we manage risk, we never eliminate it. I have this saying when we talk about water contaminants, people get all bound up and full of grief, and they get inert. They stop producing and start complaining and just raging and destroying instead of constructing. I'll say this, I say, life is the only sexually transmitted disease that's 100% fatal. So while you're here, you should enjoy it to its fullest, because we're kind of locked into that pattern. Yeah. So the big thing on the takeaway, please, is the difference between a food, a medicine, and a poison is dosage and frequency of use. That applies to television, computer screens, easy chairs, cheese balls, and all of these plants. All of the plants in your backyard, in your woods. See you on the trail.